This sacred fruit has 613 seeds, the same as Torah commandments. Eat it for health. There is a fruit sitting in your kitchen right now, or perhaps in the market just down the street, that the sages of Israel called a living Torah. Not a metaphor, not a poetic exaggeration. A literal physical object that carries within its skin the same numerical signature as the entire architecture of divine law. 613 seeds. The same number as the 613 commandments, the mitzvot, that God gave to Israel at Sinai. I have been a student of Torah and Kabbalah for 43 years, and I tell you with complete sincerity, this is not a coincidence. There are no coincidences in creation. Every correspondence between the physical world and the world of Torah is a message. And this one has been hiding in plain sight on every table, in every shuk, in every Jewish home for thousands of years. I am Rabbi Shlomo Katz. I was born in Tzfat, Saved, in northern Israel, the city where the great Kabbalists of the 16th century sat in the narrow stone alleys and unlocked the deepest secrets of creation. I studied at the yeshiva of Tzfat, and later at Bar Ilan University, but my most important education came from my grandfather, Reb Yosef Katz, a Kabbalist of the Tzfata school who began teaching me about food before I could read a page of Talmud. He used to say, "The kitchen is a Beit Midrash, a house of study, if you know how to read what's inside it." I have spent 43 years learning to read it. Today, I want to teach you about one of the most sacred fruits in all of Jewish tradition. It is one of the Shivat HaMinim, the 7 sacred foods of the land of Israel, mentioned explicitly in Deuteronomy 8:8, where the Torah describes the promised land as a land of wheat, barley, grapevines, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. 7 foods, a complete spiritual system. I have spent my life studying what each of them carries, what each of them means, and how eating them with intention and gratitude transforms not only the body but the home, the spirit, and the flow of blessing into a person's life. Today, I am sharing one of these 7 with you. The pomegranate, the rimon. And toward the end of this teaching, I will share something my grandfather whispered to me on a Shabbat evening in Tzfat that I have never spoken about publicly. Something he learned from his own teacher about when and how to eat this fruit for it to carry its fullest power. Stay with me. I was perhaps 9 or 10 years old the first time I truly understood what a pomegranate was. Not what it tasted like. I had eaten pomegranate since I was a small child, the way every child in Israel does, fingers stained red, seeds in my teeth, the sweet tartness of it on my tongue. But understanding what it was, that came on a Friday afternoon in my grandfather's kitchen in Tzfat. The kitchen of my grandfather's home was small, as most kitchens in the old city of Tzfat are small. The building itself was made of the pale gray-blue stone that Tzfat is known for, and the kitchen had a single window that looked out onto one of the narrow winding alleyways of the ancient quarter, where the stones were worn smooth by centuries of feet. On Friday afternoons, the whole house smelled of challah and of the Shabbat stew that had been cooking since Thursday night. My grandmother, may her memory be a blessing, would be moving quietly between the stove and the table, and my grandfather would be sitting in his chair near the window studying. That particular Friday he called me over. He was holding a pomegranate in both hands, the way you might hold something fragile and precious. He turned it slowly, and he said to me, "Shlomo, do you know what is inside this fruit?" I said yes. Seeds. He smiled and shook his head. He said, "Inside this fruit is a number. Inside this fruit is and that number is the shape of a Jewish soul." He explained to me what I am going to explain to you now. The tradition teaches, and this is recorded in the Talmud in Tractate Berachot, and cited by the Tosafot and later by the great Kabbalists of Tzvat, including Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, that the pomegranate contains 613 seeds, the same number as the 613 commandments of the Torah. My grandfather said, "This is not a decoration that God placed on the fruit. This is its identity. This fruit was created to mirror the structure of divine law. When you eat it, you are eating something that carries the signature of Torah inside it." Now, I want to be honest with you. In recent years, scientists have counted pomegranate seeds and found that the number varies from fruit to fruit, sometimes more, sometimes fewer. My grandfather anticipated this objection. He said, "The tradition is not making a botanical claim. It is making a spiritual claim." The pomegranate was created in correspondence with the number 613. That correspondence lives in its essence, in its spiritual root, even if individual fruits express it differently. This is the difference between the world of Torah and the world of physical measurement. The physical world is always approximate. The spiritual world is precise. This knowledge of which my grandfather gave me in that kitchen in Tzvat is the kind of knowledge that has largely disappeared from modern Jewish life. Rabbis teach halacha. They teach Talmud. They teach history and philosophy. But this dimension, the spiritual code embedded in the foods that God placed in the land of Israel, is rarely taught openly. It was passed from teacher to student, from grandfather to grandchild, in kitchens and at Shabbat tables. The modernization of Jewish life, the great disruption of the 20th century, the movement of communities from the old world to the new, all of this broke the chain in many families. That is why I am here. If you have ever felt that your home needed more blessing, write Shivat HaMinim in the comments below. Let me know you are part of this study. I want to speak honestly about something now, because I think you deserve honesty. We live in a time when the conversation about health has become, in many ways, a source of anxiety rather than a source of strength. People are afraid of what they eat. They are overwhelmed by conflicting information. One week a food is a miracle. The next week it is poison. They are surrounded by products that promise wellness and deliver confusion. The supplement industry alone generates hundreds of billions of dollars globally each year, selling people isolated compounds extracted from foods that God already gave us whole in their complete and balanced form, and that have been part of human tradition for thousands of years. And I think this is one of the great tragedies of modern life, that we have become strangers to the foods that our ancestors ate, the foods that shaped our bodies and our spirits across generations. There is also something deeper happening. Many people feel, though they may not use these words, that their lives lack a kind of spiritual nourishment. Not just physical health, but vitality. The sense that they are alive not only in their bodies, but in every dimension of who they are. This is what the tradition calls chayim, life in its fullest sense. Not merely biological existence, but a life that is connected, purposeful, flowing. And one of the things I have observed in 43 years of study and practice is that when people lose their connection to the sacred foods of their heritage, they lose something of that chayim. Not because the food itself is magical, but because the food is a vehicle, a carrier, for something that lives in the relationship between the human being, the natural world, and the divine intention that created both. The world's own science is beginning to catch up to what the Torah has always known about the pomegranate. Modern research has identified in this fruit extraordinary concentrations of compounds, polyphenols, ellagitannins, anthocyanins, that support the body in ways that no isolated supplement can replicate, precisely because, in the whole fruit, these compounds work together in relationships that are not yet fully understood. The body, it turns out, receives food the way a student receives wisdom, not as isolated facts, but as a living system where each part gives meaning to the others. But the sages of Israel knew this thousands of years before any laboratory confirmed it. I want to tell you something personal now. There was a period in my 40s. I was living in Israel, overwhelmed with responsibilities, traveling often, eating badly, sleeping too little, when I drifted away from many of these practices. I told myself I was too busy. I told myself these were beautiful traditions, but that the essential thing was study and prayer and action in the world. I fell away from the careful, intentional relationship with food that my grandfather had taught me. And I became, over the course of perhaps 2 years, a diminished version of myself. Not dramatically sick. Nothing dramatic enough to wake me up immediately, but dull. Spiritually dull. Physically tired in a way that sleep did not resolve. My grandfather used to say that when a person ignores the code embedded in the physical world becomes harder to live in. I learned the truth of that in my own body. It was returning to these practices, slowly, imperfectly, beginning with the simplest things, that restored something I had not known I had lost. What I discovered, coming back to this knowledge, is that it is not a collection of individual tips. It is a system. The 7 sacred foods that my grandfather taught me, the Shivat HaMinim, are not 7 separate pieces of advice. They are 7 dimensions of a single complete vision of how human beings can live in harmony with the world that God created for them. What I am sharing today about the pomegranate becomes 10 times more powerful when understood alongside the other 6 sacred foods. My grandfather spent his entire life organizing these 7 teachings into a complete code. It took me decades to begin understanding how deeply they connect. The pomegranate, rimon in Hebrew, appears across the full breadth of Jewish sacred literature with a consistency and a density that is remarkable even among the foods of the Shivat HaMinim. In the Torah itself, the rimon is mentioned in connection with the Promised Land in Deuteronomy 8:8, as I said. But it also appears in the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, in what is perhaps the most beautiful verse, "Your temples are like a pomegranate split open." The great sage Rashi, commenting on this verse, teaches that the word translated as temples, Raka, is read by the Midrash as meaning the empty ones among Israel. And the pomegranate's seeds, even the empty ones, are full. The teaching is that even a Jew who seems empty of Torah and mitzvot is filled with seeds of goodness. The pomegranate is the fruit of hidden fullness, the fruit of the soul that carries more than it appears to carry from the outside. The Talmud in Tractate Bereshot 57 places the pomegranate in a list of foods that appear in positive dreams, dreams that the sages considered to be echoes of divine communication. To dream of a pomegranate, the Talmud teaches, is a sign of blessing and increase. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, connects the rimon specifically to the Sephira of Malkut, the lowest of the divine emanations, the one that interfaces directly with the physical world. Malkut is the dimension through which blessing flows from the upper worlds into our world. The pomegranate is the physical carrier of that flow. When you eat it with intention and gratitude, you are not simply nourishing your body. You are participating in a small but real way in the movement of divine blessing downward into the material world. There is one more layer I want to add before I teach you the principles of how to work with this fruit. The pomegranate played a role in the architecture of holiness. The hem of the robe of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who served in the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, was decorated with alternating pomegranates and bells, as described in Exodus 28:33-34. The pomegranate was woven into the garments of the holiest human role in Israel. The rabbis ask, why the pomegranate? And one of the answers given in the Midrash Tanchuma is that the pomegranate, with its 613 seeds, represents the complete structure of the covenant, the full array of the relationship between Israel and the divine. The high priest wore that structure on his body when he entered the most sacred space in the world. This is the level of dignity that Jewish tradition assigns to this fruit. Today, I am sharing one of the 7 sacred foods, the Shivat HaMinim, with you. There are 7 in total, and my grandfather taught them not as separate practices, but as a complete system of spiritual nourishment. Each one carries a different dimension of divine blessing. The pomegranate carries the dimension of covenantal fullness, the principle that every human soul contains more than it appears to contain, and that eating this fruit with awareness is a way of honoring that fullness. Now I want to teach you 2 principles. These are principles my grandfather drew from Torah, Talmud, and Zohar, and that I have studied and verified across decades of work. They are real. They are ancient. And they can be applied today in any kitchen, in any home, by any person who approaches them with sincerity and respect. The first principle is what my grandfather called the principle of correspondence. This is the idea rooted in Kabbalah and articulated most clearly by Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari HaKadosh of Tzfat, whose teachings transformed Jewish mysticism in the 16th century. That the physical world is not separate from the spiritual world, but is its direct expression. Every object in creation has a spiritual root. Every food has what the Kabbalists call a shoresh, a root in the upper worlds. And when we eat with this awareness, we are not merely fueling our bodies. We are making contact with the spiritual root of the food. And through that root, with the dimension of divine reality that the food expresses, the pomegranate's shoresh is in the dimension of covenant and completeness, the same dimension as the 613 mitzvot. This means that eating the pomegranate with the intention of connecting to Torah, not as a magical act, but as a conscious act of alignment, carries a weight that eating it absent-mindedly does not carry. The tradition teaches in the Tanya of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, that intention, kavana, is what determines whether a physical act remains in the physical domain or rises to connect with its spiritual root. The pomegranate has the capacity for both. You determine which it becomes. How do you apply this? Before you eat pomegranate, whether the whole fruit, the seeds, or the juice, pause for a moment. Say the brasha, the blessing. Barak atah Adonai Eloheinu, Melech haolam, Borei pri ha'etz. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the tree. And then, before you eat, say quietly or in your heart, I am eating this fruit in gratitude for the Torah, for the covenant, for the fullness of blessing that is hidden in every soul and in every seed. This is not a spell. This is a declaration of intention. It takes perhaps 15 seconds, and it transforms the act of eating from a physical refueling into what the Kabbalists call an avodah, a form of sacred service. The second principle is what my grandfather called the principle of the hidden fullness, the Sod HaMelo. This principle is derived directly from the midrashic teaching about the pomegranate I mentioned earlier. Even the empty ones among Israel are full of seeds, like the pomegranate. My grandfather applied this principle not only to how we understand people, but to how we understand our own lives. He taught me that one of the most powerful spiritual uses of the pomegranate is as an antidote to the feeling of depletion, the sense that something essential is missing, that you have given too much, that you are running on empty. In Kabbalistic teaching, this feeling of depletion is called contracted consciousness, mochin de katnut, in Aramaic, the language of the Zohar. It is the opposite of expanded consciousness, mochin de gedlut, which is the state of fullness, of connection, of knowing that you are held and resourced by something larger than your own reserves. The pomegranate, as the fruit of hidden fullness, is understood in the Zohar as a physical anchor for the practice of moving from contracted to expanded consciousness, not by magic, by intention and correspondence. My grandfather's teaching, the one he shared with me on that Shabbat evening in Tzfat, the one I said I would share with you today, was this. He said that when a person feels most depleted, most empty, most disconnected from the flow of blessing in their life, that is the moment to sit quietly with a pomegranate. Not to eat it immediately. First to hold it, to feel its weight, to look at the crown on top, the Keter, which means crown, which is also the name of the highest Sephira in the Kabbalistic tree, the highest point of connection to the divine. To understand that you are holding something that contains more than you can see from the outside. And then he said, know that you are the same. You contain more than you can see. The seeds are there, the fullness is there. Eat this fruit and remember what you actually are. I have practiced this teaching for more than 40 years. I do not offer it as a guaranteed cure for anything. The tradition never promises outcomes. It promises that when practiced with intention and gratitude, the correspondence between the physical act and the spiritual reality it reflects has the power to open a person to resources they were not previously able to access. That is all. And, in my experience, across decades of practice and of watching other people practice, that opening is real. There is one more thing I want to say about timing. The tradition is very specific that the most potent time to eat the pomegranate in the context of the Shivat HaMinim is during Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, when the custom is to eat pomegranate seeds and say, "May it be your will that our merits increase like the seeds of the pomegranate." This is not merely a wish. It is a declaration of correspondence. We are stating that we intend to live in alignment with the fullness that is our inheritance. But my grandfather was clear. This practice is not limited to Rosh Hashanah. The correspondence is available all year. Rosh Hashanah is simply when the whole Jewish world activates it together, creating a collective field of intention that amplifies what any individual is doing. The part of this teaching that belongs to the complete system of the 7 sacred foods. How the pomegranate works in combination with the olive, the date, the fig, the grape, the wheat, and the barley. That is a teaching for another time, because the power of any single food in the Shivat HaMinim is real, but it is partial. My grandfather was very clear about this. He said, each of the 7 is like one of the 7 days of the week. Each day has its own character, its own holiness, its own work. But it is only when all 7 days complete a cycle that the week becomes whole, that Shabbat the 7th becomes possible. The 7 foods work the same way. Understanding the pomegranate today gives you something real and true, but there is a level of blessing available to the person who works with all 7 together that cannot be reached through any one of them alone. I want to speak for just a moment about the world we are living in now. I have been alive for more than 7 decades. I have seen a great deal. And I can say with some perspective that the particular character of the difficulty people face today, the anxiety, the sense of fragmentation, the feeling that the ground is not entirely stable beneath one's feet, is real, and it is not small. The world has changed very rapidly in ways that have outpaced the human capacity to integrate those changes. And One of the casualties of that pace is the relationship between human beings and the ancient rhythms of food, of season, of sacred practice. People are hungry in ways that food delivery apps and nutrition tracking applications cannot address. When I step away from these practices, as I have done at times in my life, as I told you, I feel that hunger. When I return to them, I feel something settle. My grandfather used to say, "The ancient practices are ancient because they work. They are still here because they work. The things that do not work do not survive thousands of years of lived human experience." Let me bring this teaching to a close by returning to where we began. A fruit. 613 seeds. The structure of divine law expressed in the organic world, in the form of something you can hold in your hands and eat. The Torah, in Deuteronomy 8:8, describes the land of Israel not by its borders but by its foods. That is a theological statement. The divine inheritance of a people is measured in part by what they eat. The foods of the promised land are not decorations. They are the code of the covenant, distributed across 7 carriers, each one a different facet of a complete vision of how human beings can live in blessing. The pomegranate teaches the principle of correspondence, that eating with intention connects the physical act to its spiritual root. It teaches the principle of hidden fullness. The depletion is a perceptual state, not a spiritual fact, and that this fruit is a physical anchor for remembering what we actually contain. And it carries, in its 613 seeds, the reminder that the entire structure of Torah is embedded in the natural world, waiting for us to recognize it. Take these principles. Use them today. Say the bracha over your pomegranate. Pause before you eat. Let the weight of the fruit remind you of the weight of what it represents. This knowledge is yours. It comes from a tradition that is thousands of years old, and it was kept alive by men and women who understood that the sacred and the physical are not 2 separate worlds. They are one world, seen from 2 angles. You have permission to see it from both. In my next teaching, I will reveal another of the 7 sacred foods, one that my grandfather said was the most misunderstood food in all of Torah, a food that almost every family uses without any awareness of the ancient practice that was meant to surround it. You will not want to miss it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications so you do not miss that teaching when it comes. And if this video brought you something true and useful today, share it with someone who needs it, a friend, a family member, someone whose home could use more blessing. Leave your comment below. Tell me which of the 7 sacred foods you want to learn about next. I read every comment. Your questions and your reflections guide these teachings. Shabbat Shalom. Until next time.